Hey, everybody, and welcome back if you're a returning viewer or listener to the Choose to Think Inspirational Podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. We basically attempt to choose to think when it comes to our emotional health. We choose to think when it comes to our relational health. We choose to think when it comes to our physical health, our spiritual health. You get the picture. Choosing to think is so critically important in every aspect of your life. And as a matter of fact, the thoughts that you choose can greatly influence. I mean, if I could just stand up and greatly influence that, I would do it, because your thoughts are critically important. And today we're going to stretch ourselves a little bit. We're going to learn a little bit about the brain and the gut connection. We're going to talk a lot about the microbiome. I have a guest on the show. His name is Gabe Dough. I just called him Gabe all day, and his company name is Good Bru, Good, good, and then Bru, BRU, playing on like brew, like coffee, like a substance, something that you can actually put into your coffee. In fact, there's a discount code for that you'll find in the show notes. So let me tell you a little bit about Gabe, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we chatted on. He is a serial entrepreneur and inventor. 3 U.S. patents have been issued to him. He's a regular guest on several other podcasts and radio shows. He loves to talk about gut health and how that's central to your well-being as an individual, as well as to the society that you live in. We really kind of got started on the interview today. I just opened the whole can of worms and I said, okay, Gabe, tell us, what is this thing called the brain-gut connection? And from there, Gabe, in only his Gabe fashion, began articulating so many things. And it was just a wee bit overwhelming, but also good. And you're going to hear for the first 12 minutes a lot of information. So I might encourage you to do what I did. I started taking notes as he was speaking so that I could kind of get get my bearings as he spoke. But after he spoke, I also said, okay, let me kind of condense all of that into 1 or 2 major lessons. So I kind of summarized that for us. But this is what I want you to know about this show today and this particular episode. Your health matters. You can be your own greatest advocate, and you should be when it comes to your health. If you've ever cared for anyone who's sick, or if your loved one has been in the hospital, and I know that if you have another family member present, for example, my dad just passed away in October. And I look back on the last couple of years of his life when he was in medical institutions over and again for his health. He was in rehab a couple of times, extended care. He also was in the hospital, I don't know how many times. Thank God for the Veterans Administration Hospital here in Lexington, Kentucky. They were so kind to him and so helpful to him. And he loved going to the VA ER. I mean, he just loved to do it. He felt safe there. He felt taken care of there. So a big shout out to the VA. But my point here is that my sister and we were my dad's advocate as he was a patient, especially in some of the longer term facilities where he was recovering. And it's critically important. I had to learn things about my dad's medications, about my dad's health and his conditions that I never knew before. And let me just tell you, it stretched me like a big, long rubber band because it was that difficult for me at times and that challenging. But it was important. And the same is true for you and for your health. If you're having, I can almost say, any kind of issue, I can ask you, what are you eating? What are you consuming socially? What are you putting into your brain? Are you taking time out with God every day to pray and to talk to Him and to have Him set the tone for your day? Are you reading your Bible? Are you actually, exercising and eating properly? And we hear those things, we know those things, but nobody else is going to love on your body quite like you can and you ought to. And if you've ever had any kind of transformational journey when it comes to your health, you'll know that you're the one in the trenches here. You're the one digging deep. So as Gabe talks, that first 12, 15 minutes, I want you to kind of tune your ear and lean in and listen, because he's going to give a lot of different information. He's going to use a lot of different terms. And you may think, I'm not sure about that, or I don't remember what that endocrine system does. And, maybe you've forgotten some of these things, but you can be your own best advocate. And that's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to learn a little bit more about the brain and the gut connection. Why? Because it's going to impact you in every single area of your life. What you think about, you become. Some people would say what you eat, you become. If you're just feeling a little meh or depressed, or maybe you're eating too much sugar, maybe that you need to release about 50 pounds, maybe that you need to begin exercising. When are you going to start? Because studies show that the motivation actually comes after the action that you take, that first tiny step that you take. We often say, oh, I've got to be motivated to go out there and put my shoes on and go out to the gym or whatever, or take a walk around the block. But I guarantee you this, if you can somehow muster up the courage to take that first step, put your shoes on, walk out your front door and get going, then the motivation comes. And then the more you do it day after day, the motivation is already there. And then you kind of like doing that. And then you've actually formed a habit. The same is true from your gut health. You don't have to do everything overnight. Matter of fact, I want you to stay tuned to the very end of the show, because I asked Gabe, I said, okay, give us 5 must-dos or things we should avoid, do or don't do kinds of things, to kind of sum up our entire talk today. And that's what he did. And I want you to hear what he says about all those things. I also want you to give his product a try. It's called Good Bru, and it's specially formulated. You can go to his website. It's goodbru.com and check out what he has to say. The link also is in the show notes there. But if nothing else, maybe this episode will serve to encourage you when it comes to your physical health, which is going to impact your spiritual health, your mental health, your emotional health, your relational health. Everything is really linked together. And I know that sometimes we can feel like, yeah, I got this area, this area, this area in my life, check, 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 but I'm kind of working on this, and that's okay. There's room for that. But I really do know that when I overcame depression several years ago, one of the things that I started doing, I got connected with other people so that I had a good community of support. I also stopped believing lies about myself and about God and about my scenario. And I've worked very hard to do that. I also began playing tennis, which opened up a new world of exercise for me and social aspects as well. And I started drinking water. I can remember I used to say all the time, I hate drinking water, because I really hated water. And now guess what? I love water. Here's my water bottle right here. You're going to see me drinking and sipping on it. Although people say don't use a straw, right? Because it then gives you those smoke lines, but oh well, whatever. But all that to say, I started very small. And I remember I was teaching a class. It was called First Year Experience class at a community college. And I was challenging my students as they're freshmen coming in, and, everything is new to them, and they're scared spitless, and they don't know, where to pay their bill or how to sign up for a class and all of that. And I had the privilege of teaching them many things about that local community college. And we were challenging each other. We had one whole section on taking good care of yourself. And I challenged them, and I thought, by golly, I'm going to challenge myself. So I challenged myself to drink 1 16-ounce bottle or glass of water a day. That's all. Because I wasn't drinking any before. I mean, like none. And I was getting plenty of fluids, but not just good, pure water for my system. And so that's how I started. I started with 1, and now I'm up to, I usually do a couple of these a day. So I'm up to maybe 68 ounces, something like that. And I don't think twice about it. Of course, playing pickleball helps too, because you're constantly guzzling water on the court. But anyway, I hope you understand the heart behind what I'm saying. Yes, we talk a lot about our thoughts, and our thoughts are everything. They permeate every aspect of how you feel, and then consequently how you behave. And so if you want to change your behavior, often it starts with your thoughts, because thoughts will influence your feelings and your mindsets and moods, which will then in turn influence how you behave, how you act, what you choose to do. So that's important. So today's episode is all about choosing to think when it comes to your physical health and taking good care of your microbiome, your gut biome. Your gut is going to impact every single area of your life. And I think, and I pray that you'll enjoy this episode and that you have a lot of fun listening to Gabe today. So God bless you, and thank you for being here. And be sure to stay tuned to the very end and check the show notes for the link to Good Bru. Welcome, Gabe, to the Choose to Think Inspirational Podcast.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm sure it's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I think it really will be. And it's one of my favorite topics, really, to talk about. We talk so much on the show about our brains, our thoughts, and quite often about health as well, and choosing to think when it comes to our physical health, as well as our spiritual and emotional and mental health. But just to discover the connection between our brains and our gut, and then as well as talking about how that whole process is linked to cognitive health, it really gets me jazzed up. What I'd like to do today, Gabe, is to get you talking, and if you could just offer us the most general and basic lesson on what is the brain gut connection, and then we'll kind of let our conversation just go from there. But if you were explaining to, say, a 10-year-old, how would you explain that whole dynamic that's going on there?
Well, I would love to be able to explain it very simply, but the thing is, it's actually multiple different levels. There's multiple things that are happening between the gut and the brain. But what you want to understand, I guess, primarily is that the gut has an amount of nerves within the gut itself that is equivalent to, say, like a small mammal's brain. And so it's like we have a second brain, and that's not insignificant. I mean, it's like 100 million neurons in the gut. So we call it the second brain, and we don't have that large number of neurons in the gut just for digestion of food. There's a reason for why we have this large number of neurons in the gut itself. It's because it plays a major role in everything about the functioning of the body and the nervous system. And so there's a nerve called the vagus nerve that goes from the gut up to the brain. And this vagus nerve is like a superhighway of information from the gut to the brain, to the central nervous system. And this influences everything from day-to-day activity and bodily function to our mood, our and cognitive function, to even things that get into like chronic disease and the health of the nervous system, but also disease of the nervous system. And so there's many things going on there. But there's also within that, not just these nerve cells, but there's also the same neurochemistry in the gut that exists in the brain. So 90% of the serotonin that's produced in our bodies is produced in the gut, not in the brain. And serotonin is a major neurotransmitter. It's not just the feel-good neurotransmitter that it gets so much attention for in the brain. Serotonin produced in the gut not only affects the brain and brain activity and mood in sort of in like a direct way, but it does so in a also very indirect way as well. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter that signals certain things in the digestive system about the processing and digestion of food, appetite. It affects cardiovascular function. The heart has receptors for serotonin, and then serotonin also travels through the body where it enters the cells and is turned into melatonin in the cells, and then that melatonin directly affects mitochondrial function. But as in generally speaking, if your digestive system is under attack, so to speak, whether it's because we're under certain specific stress, which affects the digestive system, but in reverse, if we have dysbiosis or we're sick or the gut's not functioning properly, it doesn't really matter. It then sends the stress signals to the brain and to the central nervous system as if we were under attack or if we were under stress. If you think about like just public speaking is a really good example. Many people have digestive issues when they have to speak publicly. There's the theory for that is, for example, that kind of stress, and there's many of those kinds of stresses, but is that we need to send more energy to the brain. And so it takes away, it kind of shuts down the gut. And then you kind of have some digestive issues, but that should be kind of temporary, just like kind of in the sense of, everybody always wants to use the analogy of, say, you're getting attacked by a lion, and all of a sudden all your energy gets sent to the brain so that you can process and think and how in your endocrine system to get out of that situation. But then, you have digestive issues as a result of that, but they should be temporary. However, if let's say you have some sort of chronic digestive health issues, it's sort of sending that same kind of signaling to the brain as if we're under attack. And so it's sort of a reciprocal process going on. And when they study say, autistic children who are known for having high anxiety, and they change the gut microbiota of these autistic children, they find that anxiety and levels and whatnot come way down. Same thing when they look at military veterans. So I was speaking with a retired dentist who was a Vietnam vet. He was a Marine in Vietnam, and he keeps up with a lot of this kind of stuff. And he was telling me that the VA was doing a lot of research on PTSD and its relationship to the gut microbiota, for example. And so we know that people who have PTSD or some other kind of trauma-related mental health issue can benefit from a healthier gut microbiota. So changing the gut microbiome can help reduce and relieve some of these issues related to that disorder. However, what's even more interesting, I think, from a research point of view, is that when they look at the difference between people who develop PTSD, veterans in this case, but it could be, people develop PTSD from all kinds of trauma all through life. And not just, it doesn't have to also return into PTSD. I mean, we're just always under stress, and how are we managing that stress? But they look at the microbiota of these veterans, and they said, at the time they actually experienced the trauma, if they were in dysbiosis, if their gut microbiome was in disarray at the actual time they experienced the trauma, they were predisposed to developing the post-traumatic stress disorder. And so the gut's regulating, and the gut microbiota is regulating the serotonin levels, other neurotransmitters. And there's another one that's also produced in the brain called corticotropin factor, or release factor, and this manages cortisol levels. So the brain produces the same molecule, but it's also produced in the gut, and it's produced by the same cells that produce the serotonin. And so when we're in dysbiosis, and we know that the microbiome, so we have good bacteria and bad bacteria, when it's in dysbiosis and we have more of the bad bacteria taking over, we know that affects the body's, these cells, and how they function. And we know that when we're in dysbiosis, that affects the serotonin production, but it also affects this corticotropin release factor. And so these same cells, now they're producing less serotonin and more of this corticotropin factor, which regulates cortisol, which is adrenaline, which is related to the production of adrenaline. And so you're getting both higher levels of anxiety-causing hormones in your body and lower levels of calming, functioning neurotransmitter serotonin. There's some other ones too, but if you're already in dysbiosis at the time you're experiencing stress or trauma, you're now predisposed to reacting and to that in a less than optimal way. And so this is related to the multiple faceted way between a microbiome, which you can kind of think of as like, we have to have a microbiome. So you can have a good one or a bad one, but think of your microbiome as like another organ in the body. It actually produces very many important metabolites, as well as has a major role in how we absorb nutrients from the foods that we eat and break down the foods that we eat. But then that has a direct effect on the digestive tract, which has a direct effect on the endocrine system, and that has a direct effect on the central nervous system. So it's not just, a one-way street or even a two-way street, it's like an intersection of all these things coming together in our body, and the gut is just a major player in that, and especially the gut in combination with the gut microbiome. So for example, let's say in the gut where we get with the stomach, for example, the stomach is the most acidic part of the digestive tract, most acidic place in the body. But the acidity in the gut, in the stomach, is produced by our body itself. So if we have a healthy digestive system, we should be producing the right amounts of enzymes and acid in the stomach. And if we have a healthy mucosal lining, all of that should be helping to digest our food properly, and we shouldn't be experiencing acid reflux and GERD, indigestion, and all of these kinds of things. But when things get in dysbiosis, all that starts malfunctioning. The mucosal lining starts to get broken down. People start to experience, acid reflux and indigestion, and et cetera. But as we get into the small intestine, that pH is supposed to move back in a healthy digestive tract back to more of a neutral pH. And then when we get into the lower intestine, it's supposed to shift back to more of an acidic environment, a lower pH, not as acidic as the stomach, but more acidic. But what's different in the lower intestine, and you can think of the lower intestine, so the small intestine that's where a lot of these neurons are at. And it's a very interesting and complicated organ in the body, the small intestine. A lot's going on there. And then when we get into the large intestine, this is how important the microbiome is. The large intestine, which we have a lot of, is mostly a habitat for the microbes. And that's also with the appendix. So, people, well, what is the appendix for? It's this thing that's left over. No, they think the appendix plays this role of like preserving our microbiota so that like when we're sick or we have diarrhea and we lose a lot of our of our microbes and whatnot, that appendix was there to help reestablish that microbiota and help rebuild it in the large intestine. So the large intestine is like a home. I mean, it's like its primary role. It doesn't have all the fine elements of the small intestine. It's really like a home to the microbiota, and the microbiota actually produces its own environment. And so in a healthy microbiota where we have it's dominated by like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria and Akkermansia and some of these other really important microbes, it produces its own environment, a lower pH. And the lactobacillus actually is really probably plays the most major role in that because lactobacillus produces lactic acid, which then which lowers the pH and creates this environment that supports all the other good microbes. And then when we get in dysbiosis, these bad bugs, take over and they produce more of an alkaline or a higher pH environment. And that really sequesters the good microbes. And so it's very hard to get back into homeostasis from dysbiosis because the microbes are producing their own environment. And when one starts to win the battle, it's hard for the other ones to build themselves back up. So you've got to do things like healthy habits, and that's what our products here for, is to help rebuild that environment so that your good colonizing microbes that you get from your mother primarily at birth take back over. And then which brings it to the point of like, how do we get these microbes? So from our mothers, usually most of them come from birth and from nursing. So we get them from mom, and you see this like with people who have been birthed through cesarean. They have much reduced diversity in their microbiome. But we also have, just as a Western culture, much less diverse microbiomes than we had like antibiotics. And then about the same time antibiotics came along, we also got a lot of these pesticides and preservatives and things started getting into our food. So they can see from every generation from around World War II to today that there's been less and less diversity in the microbiome of Western people. And so this has had a huge impact on our health in general. But then you add on top of that we keep adding in all of these modern advancements in medicine, et cetera. And it's like a compounding effect. Plus you have all of these environmental toxins floating around, like the forever chemicals and things like that are all affecting the gut. But in doing that, there is God and nature has also applied something else, and that's these transitory probiotics. And these are probiotics that live out in the environment, in the soil. And if we were digging up our food from the ground, we would get some of these probiotics that are transitory probiotics. And so they don't colonize the gut, but they move through the gut and they germinate in the lower intestine where they help to produce that environment we were talking about that the other good microbes like to live in, and they kind of add like a support mechanism to these colonizing microbes. And these are spore-forming probiotics that can survive through the stomach and the stomach acid, and that's what we use in our product as a spore-forming Bacillus coagulans. It's got 25 clinical studies behind it. And because of that, you can also put it in coffee. So because it's a spore, the heat of the coffee doesn't affect it. But more importantly, the stomach acid doesn't affect it. And then it makes its way to the lower intestine where it germinates. But when it germinates, it also produces the same lactic acid that lactobacillus does. So it's helping to create that lower pH that then these other microbes can start to grow in. And you combine that with a prebiotic fiber. In our case, we use inulin fiber, which is the same kind of soluble fiber that's found in fruit, and that's what we know the microbiome really likes to feed on. And so these microbes need to feed on this fiber so that they can grow and produce these very important metabolites, as well as break down the food and the nutrients that we're getting, as part of our diet. One of the things that the microbiome does is it produces short chain fatty acids, and we do not produce any short chain fatty acids ourselves. We get a little bit from the food that we eat, but 95% of it is produced by the microbiome. And these short chain fatty acids are essential for cellular metabolism. 70% of the energy needed for the cells in the digestive system come from these short chain fatty acids, which come from the microbiome. And so when you're in dysbiosis, you're not producing these short chain fatty acids, which means the cells in the digestive tract are not getting the energy sources that they need, and they're scavenging for other energy sources, and that gets into a lot of metabolic problems for the cells in the digestive system. But these short chain fatty acids also circulate through the blood system, providing needed energy sources for the cells throughout the body. And this is all coming from the microbiome. So you get now you get a compounding effect if you're in dysbiosis. You're not producing these short chain fatty acids, which now mean the cells in the digestive system aren't getting the energy sources that they need, and so they dysfunction. So now your digestive lining starts to break down. The epithelial cells in the digestive system start to break down, and the mucosal lining starts to break down, in addition to the fact that you don't have these other supporting microbes, which then gets into what we call like leaky gut. So when the cells aren't functioning properly, they start to lose their bond to one another, these tight junctions. Now, things that are supposed to stay in the digestive tract start to get outside of the digestive tract, and the body sees those as foreign agents, starts to produce antigens against those, and then you start to get into these inflammatory immune responses, which lead to many health issues. So it's like this. You're not getting the nutrients that you need, but now you're also getting attacked by, or your body's attacking these foreign agents. One of these is proteins. The microbiome plays a large role in breaking down proteins. Proteins, our body's not meant to absorb whole protein. We eat proteins, whether it's collagen or plant proteins or other meat proteins, they have to be broken down into peptides and amino acids for the body to use them. But the microbiome breaks these proteins down, but the microbiome also metabolizes these proteins into other peptides and like little factories as well. And one of the things that the body really attacks is when things get into dysbiosis and these proteins are not digested properly and they get outside of the digestive tract. The immune system really does not like foreign proteins. And so that's a really a big inflammatory response issue is these proteins that are not getting broken down and getting outside the digestive system. And so most of the nutrients, vitamins, the microbiome also not only helps us absorb vitamins from the food that we eat, but they also manufacture vitamins, especially B vitamins. And some other things, but those are absorbed through the digestive system into the bloodstream, and they go through the liver. Whereas like lipids, fats, they are absorbed through the lining of the digestive system, and where they make their way into the lymphatic system and get pumped around through the lymphatic system before they get into the bloodstream and into the liver. And one of the things that happens with leaky gut is, especially with these proteins and other things and toxins, they get mixed in with those lipids, and they end up going through the same lymphatic system as the lipids and the fats go through, which is not intended. The body does not.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's a lot going on. Yeah, and it's connected to cardiovascular disease with dementia, for example, in the gut-brain axis, and that in this sense, there's several connections there, but one of them that's been seen for a long time, but now they're starting to get a little bit better handle on, is the relationship between the oral microbiome, digestive health, and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. So there's a couple of things that's been pointed out is oral health. So the same bacteria that cause gingivitis and cavities and et cetera translocate into the digestive system. And we don't have a strong digestive system, we don't have a strong microbiome. They can proliferate into the lower digestive tract, where they start to produce these same toxins and molecules that they produce in the mouth and circulate into the body and get into the nervous system, and that causes inflammatory responses in the brain. So there's a direct relationship between the digestive tract and mental health in that regard. Then also with Parkinson's disease, there's one study that's showing that it looks like there's a problem with the metabolism of iron in the brain, and that's related back to B vitamins, which is related back to the microbiome. So dysbiosis or lacking certain microbes means that we're getting less vitamin B, which means that the cells aren't able to metabolize, in this case, iron correctly, which is they're correlating that to Parkinson's disease. So these are some of those correlations as well. And many of the microbes, yeah.
So, Gabe, you have just spoken 21 minutes, and it's kind of like a fire hose. And I consider myself pretty smart, and I know a good deal about the brain gut connection because I've studied it. I kind of nerd out on that kind of stuff. But if you don't mind, I want to just try to take what you said and maybe condense it down just to bring some sense of maybe cohesion or clarity to it, because you used a ton of words that we're familiar with, but maybe we don't quite remember what they mean. If I had to say, okay, this is one of the major lessons of what you just taught us, it would be that nothing is isolated in our bodies. For example, the fact that we have neurons in our gut, I remember when I first learned that and I was astounded. Recently, I even read an article about the neurons in your heart, and we just don't tend to think of those systems being so interrelated, although they are. So I think that's definitely a starting point, that it's not just the endocrine system, for example, and the central nervous system and the digestive tract and all of that. It's not just those reduced to what they may be essentially, but it is that all of these things, the way God designed our bodies, it's one thing is related to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. Like you said, an intersection. It's not just, a one way. It is like everything converging on everything else. And why is that important? That's important because we can take a more holistic approach on how we're treating our bodies. And if we want relief, let's say, for brain fog or lack of clarity or confusion, sometimes it might be that what we're eating is also impacting those kind of cognitive functions. They're not isolated. So I think that was one major takeaway from what you said. The second takeaway I think I have is that we can actually influence our bodies, probably in a way that we've never considered before. And I don't know what you would say is maybe the most important thing, but I know a lot of people would say that food is medicine and that food is very helpful in curing so many of what ails us, even from maybe something otherwise typical like GERD or acid reflux, all the way to Parkinson's, like you mentioned. What we're consuming and what we're eating is going to have a huge impact on the physical state of our body as well as on our mind and our brain. So do I have those two things kind of right, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I would just add, if in a way to think about this for a lot of people still, I know some people like, I know you yourself are very well aware of this, but the microbiome is it's not secondary or tertiary to our health. It's primary, just like exercise and sleep and the food that we eat. The microbiome itself is a primary aspect to overall good health. We directly impact the microbiome and with the foods that we eat and the things that go into our body, the medicines and things that we take, but also the exercise we get. That they're all interacted, and it works the other way. A good microbiome gives us resilience. It's like more fuel in the tank. We have more resistance, more overall stamina to resist these assaults that come to us from the outside environment. So it's a complete reciprocal, holistic type of system.
Right. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I want to kind of maybe segue into a very hopeful aspect for us, that we're not just kind of victims of our environment. Though we are in many ways, we still there are actions that we can take, things that we can do that will actually help us. And I think a lot of people know these things. For example, drinking water is so critically important, getting sunshine and vitamin D, getting outside. A lot of us know those things. But regarding that brain gut connection, could you give us maybe, let's just say, the top 5 must-dos in your expert opinion? What would you say that no matter what, we don't want to compromise in these 5 areas as it's related to that brain gut connection specifically? What are the must-dos here?
Well, must do's. I'm going to say just, a lot of the things that we already know. Exercise is very important to having a good overall functioning body, and that in turn also impacts the microbiome and the digestive system. So you just remember, as I was saying earlier, everything's reciprocal. So it kind of goes in both directions. Definitely get some exercise. And one of the things I guess I'd like to mention about exercise is that I think a lot of people think that, oh, well, if I can't get 20 minutes or 30 minutes of exercise, I just might as well hang it up. You would not, going from zero to something is huge, and it builds and it builds. So, if you're depressed or you've just been stuck in a situation where you haven't been able to exercise, don't underestimate the importance of just like 2 minutes. Like going from zero to a couple of minutes is more than going from 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And people, I think it's hard for people to really get that. It does a lot. It affects everything from what we were talking about, the lymphatic system, the cardiovascular system. It just wakes up the muscles, gets certain things turned on. Even a couple of minutes is really important. So don't underestimate that. Food that we eat obviously is going to be really important. There's always debate about what kind of diet we should be eating and this kind of thing or whatever. I mean, I think the Mediterranean diet probably is like, you always go back to the Mediterranean diet and say that's the one that's got so much evidence behind it. But if you do carnivore or you do high protein, whatever, you got to make sure you get fiber into that diet, because without the fiber, the microbiome cannot produce those short chain fatty acids. So you could, even if you're going to be on a high protein diet, you still have to have fiber. And when they look at like tribes and indigenous people that have really diverse and healthy microbiomes, they eat a lot of fiber. So it's some myth that they're just out there eating, meat all the time. They have crazy amounts of fiber in their diet, and that really helps feed the microbiome.
Let me interrupt you, Gabe, just for 1 second, because I meant to clarify this earlier. We know that prebiotics feed the bacteria, right? And probiotics grow. Is that correct? I learned that a long time ago. But to me, they're both kind of the same, because if you're feeding, aren't they growing? Or is that not? Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, if I'm eating, I'm also growing. Like with a kid, you feed a kid, the kid grows. So could you just quickly explain the difference between prebiotics and probiotics?
Yeah, prebiotics are non-living material. I mean, in the sense that, and probiotics are little microorganism cells, bacteria that are living, and they feed on these different things that are in our digestive system. And the prebiotics are particularly, I mean, you could really call many things prebiotic, but doesn't necessarily make a good prebiotic. But generally speaking, we think of the word prebiotics used in a positive sense. So these are sources of energy for the microbes that help support the good probiotics. A probiotic obviously means good. Pro means good. We don't call pathogens probiotics. So in generally, there's this word called not symbiotic, but synbiotic, and that's when you take a prebiotic that feeds a probiotic to support the probiotics. And there's a lot of fibers on the market that are not the kinds of, they're sold as prebiotics sometimes, or they're sold as soluble fibers. They are not fibers that we would naturally get in nature to feed our microbiome. And many people we talk to, customers, like, well, I was using this product and it just made this situation worse. These are wheat dextrins and corn dextrins and synthetic fibers, and they're sold by the biggest companies. The biggest soluble fiber on the market is a wheat or a corn dextrin. And that we do not get that in our diet. When you eat corn or wheat, you don't just get the dextrin. That's a processed molecule that is not what our microbiome would feed on. Another good prebiotic, which of course you get calories with that, is this like resistant starches. So you might have heard of, like, if you take like a potato and you bake a potato and you put it in the fridge, those starches will kind of bind up and they produce a good prebiotic source for microbiome. And then we get a lot of insoluble fibers too in the leafy vegetables that we eat and that kind of thing. And they play a role in both feeding the microbes, but they also play kind of another role in adding more bulk to the food that we're digesting, which can help a lot with helping keeping a healthy digestive system. So yeah, so prebiotics are
Okay,
feeding
so
up. So we use inulin
let
fiber in
me
ours, which inulin is. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to, you said the wheat dextrin and corn dextrin. So something like Metamucil, for example. Is that like a big thumbs down in your book?
Well, Metamucil is that's a insoluble fiber, and they use a psyllium husk. And psyllium husk wouldn't be something that would normally be in our normal diets. So it's the husk of like a seed, and we wouldn't really normally eat that. But it's not in the same class as these soluble fibers, which I was really kind of talking about with the dextrins and compared to like say
Okay.
the inulin that we use. I don't know what to say about something like that, because I think you have to just kind of try things for yourself and see what they're doing. But a lot of the Metamucil, the psyllium husk type of stuff, it's meant to it gels up with water. So for one thing, it's kind of like some people use it as like an appetite suppressant kind of thing. And then it also can help pull and maintain and keep moisture and water into the digestive tract, which can help people with, digestion and constipation. But the insoluble fibers do as well. And then, for example, with the inulin fiber that we use, it's soluble, and of course, so it dissolves in water, but it will help to bring and maintain more moisture into the digestive tract, which is a really interesting process. We don't have time to talk about it, but the way that our body uses water in digestion is extremely interesting. But one of the things that the insoluble fibers really do is they really provide that great prebiotic source, whereas the psyllium husk really is not like really a prebiotic. And so you get the more of the longer term benefits in addition to the immediate benefits that might help somebody with constipation or that kind of thing. You're
Okay.
starting to get the long term benefits.
What is inulin?
Inulin is it's a polysaccharide. There's many types of inulin. There's inulins that have been made for the food manufacturing industry. These are longer chain inulins. They're more, kind of like you would say synthetic. And then there's the short chain inulins that are in fruits and that kind
Okay.
of thing. And it's the primary. So if you eat an apple, a large amount of what you're eating with the apple is inulin fiber. So it's a soluble fiber that's in the fruit, and that it's kind of got mildly sweet. It doesn't have much flavor, but it's mild, the short one. So if you get an inulin fiber that doesn't have any sweetness at all, that's probably one of these like synthetic inulins. It tastes like our product. It's almost tasteless, but you hear just a little bit of sweetness, and that's the short chain inulin fiber that the microbiome has fed on and likes to feed on and uses as an energy source. And ours is organic inulin fiber and ours, but
Okay. Okay, so the top two must-dos, we have exercise and then we have food. And thank you for explaining like the pre and the probiotic, the functions and what they are. So what would be number three?
well, from what I've read, it sort of relates back to food, but it's really this nemesis of refined sugar and sugary drinks. And if you add this modern diet that we have with sugar and everything, it does change the microbiome. So not only when you take a map, so I've actually met the researcher who did this. So they did a big survey of the United States and of sugary drink, specifically sugary drink consumption. And then they laid that map over cancer and cardiovascular disease. And the map of per capita consumption of sugary beverages almost perfectly matches the prevalency of cardiovascular disease and cancer. So, so there's this direct relationship between the sugar, metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer. But now what they're also seeing is so this changes the microbiome, and it gets more interesting because they're seeing that especially with cardiovascular disease, now there's a huge correlation between people who suffer heart attacks and also the severity of heart attacks and their microbiome. The study was done in Spain with like bankers, and the biggest correlation they could see was that they could relate this back to the microbiome, but that microbiome could also be changed by the sugary beverage consumption. So there's actually microbes that feed on these sugars, and these microbes are very assiduous. They don't only feed on this sugar and then proliferate, but they also now send signals to our nervous system to make us crave sugar. So the microbes that eat the sugar also make us crave the sugar. So I would add, as a whole subset to food is really watch your sugar consumption. I think it just keeps going on and on about that. Exercise, foods that we eat, but then specifically sugars, then of course bad habits. I don't want to tell people about alcohol and smoking and these sorts of things other than they're bad for you. And
Right.
and that they're going to affect your digestive system. We know that with alcohol and smoking both, you have major increases in things like acid reflux and indigestion and GERD, which then leads to cancers of the digestive system and obviously other cancers. But you really have to look at these habits and think, draw the line somewhere, wherever that line is. But when you look with alcohol, there does seem to be some little range in there, but it's much smaller than like the alcohol companies like to grab onto some data that says, oh, it's okay to drink 2 glasses of wine. And then they run with that. And it's really not what it is. I mean, you really look at the research, it's much smaller amounts than that, that might be okay or potentially have some minor health benefits, but mostly it's just bad for you. So,
I agree.
so these habits, you can do a lot of great things and you can say take care of all your health and all of that, but you got to hold yourself accountable, for these bad habits because you reverse everything that you're working towards. So you can't say like because I know a lot of people like this, and they're trying to do all these healthy things, but then they can't stop, the drinking or whatever it is that they're doing, and you just can't say that you can't make up for everything, and especially as you get older, right? I mean, it's like
Mhm.
your body needs every ounce of energy and production and that kind of thing that it can get. And then of course I would say, taking care of your microbiome and understanding your microbiome in a very specific way. So all these things are kind of tying together, but even sleep, your microbiome affects your circadian rhythm, and your circadian rhythm affects your microbiome, and that gets into all these neurotransmitters and things that we were talking about. When it comes to the microbiome, I think so everybody's microbiome is as unique as your thumbprint, but there are, correlations between the family you're from and where you live and the different things. And so if you have some really serious issues, health issues, I would look into something like, say, to the extent of like, I think this research behind like these fecal transplants and that kind of thing is extremely interesting. It's amazing what some of the results of these are. So I think that's coming along more, and people should be aware of that. But for the majority of people, that's probably not right now going to be something is going to be an option for the majority of people. So you need to just start looking at the things you can do specifically to start supporting your gut microbiome. Obviously, that's what our product is here to do, is to help people. We have like a very high reorder rate, but be aware of like probiotics that are sold in capsules on the shelves. They don't survive very well. They're not intended to really survive that way. They don't survive through the stomach acid, and there's not enough room in a capsule to really get enough prebiotic fiber. So with our product, for example, you can use a scoop, and the scoop allows you to adjust it to what works for you. We tell people to start very small, and many people just use 1 scoop a day, and that's what works for them. Some people use 2 scoops, whatever. But with our product, for example, you're actually able to manage it to what works for you, but you're also, as using a scoop, getting a significant amount of soluble fiber, prebiotic fiber, which you really can't get at a capsule. But look at your diet just in general and make sure you're getting the right kinds of fibers and things, and listen to your body as well, because one thing works for one person doesn't work for another person. And you can start to, if you pay attention, you can start to see this. I mean, you can start to say, this does something for me. I feel better, I have better digestion, more regular. These are all they're good signs of better health. And bad signs, like, I mean, like we get a lot of testimonials that our product helps people with acid reflux, and that's a big deal because acid reflux is really sign that some bad things are going on, and medical solutions are really just band-aids, and acids and proton pump inhibitors
Mhm.
really ultimately make the problem worse over time. They're not solutions, and they even start to then affect your ability to digest food properly, and all of those sorts of things. So, really be aware of the kind of things that you're doing to support your microbiome, and listen to your body,
Yeah.
in that way as well.
Those are so good, Gabe. And tell everyone a little bit about Good Brew and how they can get that product.
Yeah, Good Bru is a symbiotic. It's no preservatives, no additives or manufactured aids. It's just organic inulin fiber and a probiotic, Bacillus coagulans. It's got over 25 clinical studies behind it, shown to help improve protein utilization by 20%, improve immune function, digestive function. We have a lot of people who it helps them with some specific gut health issues like chronic constipation. We got a lot of stories of people who, that's a big issue. Like 10 to 20% of the population suffers from that. Um, like GERD and acid reflux, to people who just take it more for health optimization. We have people who told us that it's helped them with things, even with like their skin and that kind of thing. But like muscle recovery and from the protein utilization. But keep in mind, the protein utilization is not just about muscles. Everything in the body functions off of protein. Like the peptides run the show from the immune system, the cardiovascular system, everything is proteins. And so a healthy microbiome will help with that. So GoodBru is GODBRU .com. So BRU.com.
How long does it typically take for folks to actually notice any kind of change, do you think? Because again,
Well,
it can't be just something isolated, right? It has to be, they've got to, this is for probably the person who says, I'm really wanting to level up on how I treat myself. I want to start being more aware of my environment, how I'm moving my body, what I'm taking in. I mean, how good is my sleep? Am I drinking adequate water? All those things. It sounds like we need to kind of be on board for all of those things. What do your results usually show for someone who's saying, yeah, I'm ready to level up and start this year right, and not just this year, but today, and get going in the right direction?
yeah, we're really surprised with the range on that because people who have specific gut health issues, I've been blown away by how many of them with acid reflux and GERD and chronic constipation, some of these other things, have seen like something very dramatic in a week or whatever. But of course, with the health optimization, you start talking to people who've been using the product longer, and then they start noticing changes in regularity and muscle recovery, and oh, they don't feel like there's colds or they're last as long, they don't get sick as often. That's a little bit, people observe that over a little bit longer period of time. I would say, for me, when it dawned on me one day, because I'll get into a habit of jogging and then I'll get out of the habit of jogging and I'll expect to get sore, and this was a couple of years ago, but I went jogging after I hadn't gone in quite a while. And I was like, man, I just really did not get that sore. And now I've noticed it even more often. I'm 49, and I've been getting, I played sports and stuff when I was younger. I would get sore when I was 18 years old. So, I mean, I
Right.
expect to get more sore, more sore these days. And I've definitely noticed personally, and I've talked to other people that experience the same thing, much less soreness and faster muscle recovery after strenuous activity. For me, I probably started noticing that it might dawned on me, it may have happened earlier, but probably after about 6 months. But they've done some studies with that, with like military groups and whatever. There are actually studies, and it was like 6 week study, like 6 week studies, and they showed faster muscle recovery and less soreness after training with these
Mhm.
groups, even after like a 6 week study.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Gabe, and for sharing all of this. I know it's been kind of a biology lesson for us, but we need to be concerned about that and not shy away from that just because it may seem a little daunting or a little difficult to understand. We can learn about this. I love that was that was kind of your fifth point, was knowing about your microbiome and taking care of that. That goes right along with every other connection that we might have, even in our body. So it's very encouraging and it's empowering to think that we do play a role, and we can influence and we can make choices in our lives to really feel a whole lot better. And God has designed our bodies in such a miraculous way to do that. I mean, it's just always wanting to be better and get better and recover. And I love that about that. So thank you so much. I'll be sure and drop into the show notes, your website information, as well as a discount code for our listeners and viewers today. So thank you so much.
thank you, Victoria. It was a pleasure to be on. And it'll be a 10% discount, so, in addition
Yeah,
to
that'd
any
be great.
specials. Yeah. So,
Okay,
so thank you.
cool. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you for that. I can't wait. That sounds really awesome.